A Hittite king sent a letter to Egypt. The subject was grain. Trevor Bryce, in the Kingdom of the Hittites, could have described correspondence as framing a threat to the empire's survival. The grain must arrive by ship. No other supply remained. The letter was not unique. At least 2 or 3 similar appeals survive from the final decade of Hittite rule at Hattusa. They span the reigns of Tudhaliya IV and Suppiluliuma II, the last 2 kings to govern from the capital. The earliest requests date to around 1210 before the Common Era. The final appeals fall near 1200, each named the same shortage. This episode examines what those letters reveal about the state that produced them, and what, equally, they do not say. The anchor secondary source is Trevor Bryce. His Kingdom of the Hittites, 2nd edition, Oxford University Press, 2005, is the standard English-language account of Hittite political history. Chapters 13 and 14 cover the empire's final period. Bryce draws directly on the Hittite Administrative Archive at Hattusa, one of the most extensive ancient Near Eastern document collections that survives. The archive covers administrative, diplomatic, legal, and religious domains. The grain request letters belong to the diplomatic subset. That subset is small. Each surviving letter documents a transaction that should not have been necessary. A state with its own provisioning apparatus was appealing outward for a basic commodity. Egypt received these requests. So did Ugarit. The Hittite king was not writing to one foreign court. He was writing to whoever could send grain. The second evidence type is archaeological. The German Archaeological Institute has excavated ancient Hattusa at modern Bogascarl continuously since 1906. Peter Neve directed the major excavation phases from the 1970s through the 90s. His study, published in 1993, establishes the scale of the city's storage infrastructure. Andreas Schachner has led ongoing excavation since 2006. Their combined record documents substantial storage magazines throughout the site. The Great Temple complex in the lower city contained large ceramic storage vessels in significant numbers. The palace magazines at the inner citadel were constructed for large-scale provisioning. That architecture was deliberate. It was designed to make external appeals unnecessary. The correspondence tells us supply failed. The excavation tells us what was built so supply would not fail. The distance between those 2 facts is the episode's subject. This episode does not read one source against the collapse. It reads 2 sources against each other. What does an emergency grain request actually measure? The internal buffer is already gone before the first letter is sent. A state with functioning granaries does not write to Egypt for grain. It draws on its own reserves. The act of requesting is itself the evidence that those reserves have failed to self-replenish. The Hittite grain request letters span at least a decade. The earliest correspondence in Bryce's account dates to the reign of Tudhaliya IV. He ruled from approximately 1237 to 1209 before the Common Era. The final appeals come under Suppiluliuma II, who took the Hittite throne around 1207. This is not a record of one failed harvest. A decade of requests, addressed to multiple foreign courts, document structural collapse in the agricultural base. The state's provisioning demand was substantial. The capital required grain for the palace bureaucracy, the temple personnel, the military, and the city's population. The letters do not specify which category of demand was failing first. They register total shortfall. The Hittite administrative language had no category for a graduated decline. It recorded what was needed. It could not record what was broken. The excavation record makes the gap concrete. Neve and Schachner's documentation shows the Great Temple complex holding grain for the capital's population, its military, and its temple personnel simultaneously. The palace magazines at the inner citadel served the same function at a different scale. Both systems were designed to absorb seasonal variation without external appeal. The correspondence from the same period requests those same provisions from outside, from Egypt, from Ugarit, from whoever could supply them. The architecture and the correspondence are measuring the same demand. They are not producing the same answer. The storage infrastructure shows what the state designed. The letters show what the state received. The distance between those two is the forensic record of collapse. Kaniewski and colleagues document a sustained drought across the eastern Mediterranean, beginning around 1200 before the Common Era. The Hittite grain crisis sits inside that climate window. It does not require that climate event as its sole explanation. Bryce documents internal agricultural pressures and political fragmentation as contributing factors, but the letters span 2 reigns and a decade. The climate data spans the same window. The state's administrative record and the climate proxy record describe the same deteriorating landscape from different instruments. What the letters do not record is the cause. The Hittite kings framed the shortage as a logistics problem. The grain must come from outside. No letter identifies why internal production had failed. The administrative language could record the symptom. It could not diagnose the source. The letters are accurate about what the state lacked. They are silent about why the state lacked it. That silence is the evidence. By the reign of Emperor Ling, the Eastern Han court was selling official titles to raise revenue. The grain tax base sustaining the Kanglin system had eroded. The Kanglin was the Han state's network of grain storage facilities, famine reserves, tax collection nodes, and military provisioning points built across the empire. Yellow River flooding struck repeatedly across the late 2nd century of the Common Era. Agricultural leachages compounded the midge. Rafe de Crescenzo, in Fire over Luoyang, records the court's substitution. Grain revenue had failed. The court replaced it with title revenue. The Ho Hanshu records grain shortages and frontier supply failures across Emperor Ling's reign. He ruled from 168 to 189 of the Common Era. The failure mode was internal. The agricultural base was collapsing under simultaneous environmental and political stress. The court's response papered over the cause without naming it. The Byzantine failure followed a different route. Egypt was the Eastern Roman Empire's principal grain source. Egyptian grain funded the Annona distribution system, the Alexandrian fleet, and a substantial share of Eastern administrative costs. Arab forces completed the conquest of Egypt by 641 of the Common Era. Byzantine forces could not retake it. John Haldon, in Byzantium in the 7th century, documents the fiscal consequence. The large professional army could no longer be funded. The theme system replaced it. The state that emerged was structurally different from the one that had existed before. The failure mode here differs from the Hittite and Han cases. The Byzantine grain base was not collapsing internally. It was severed by conquest. The dependency structure is the same, a geographically concentrated supply base bearing the weight of an entire administrative apparatus. The mechanism of failure is not. In all 3 cases, the grain dependency was invisible during normal operation. The first legible signal was the one that came too late to reverse. The pattern is state capacity measured in grain. A state built around a provisioning system will not see that system's failure until it produces a shortfall. The provisioning architecture absorbs fluctuation. What it cannot absorb, it cannot name. The emergency grain request, the sold official title, the lost province, these are not early warnings. They are late readings of a process already complete. In each case, Hattusa, Luoyang, Constantinople, the provisioning system was the last thing administrators understood. The Hittite letters named a logistics problem. The Han court named a revenue problem. The Byzantine court named a military problem. None named the structural dependency that made each problem fatal. The Hittite kings knew the grain was gone. They did not know the system that grew the grain was gone.